Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
This is the last one, the fifth and final Daredevil episode for the July 2024 Not Quite Right prize. Daredevils are people who have signed up on purpose for the honour of having their story read on the podcast and getting absolutely skewered by us.
Yeah, nice.
So our final victim is Dez Veares with the story Dazzling Diamonds, Heroic Horses and Pink Panties.
So from what I gather, this is Dez's first appearance in the Not Quite Right prize. So a newbie. So going in hard with a Daredevil first round. Yeah. So brave, mad, crazy. I mean, you're amongst friends here. So welcome into the mad, crazy world of the Not Quite Right prize.
And we do like to stress constructive criticism, but criticism nonetheless. We're not here to blow smoke up anyone's ass. We're here to give real, actionable advice.
Yeah. It's going to hurt though, so look out. I hope you're feeling ready for it, and I hope everyone else listening can take something away from this as well, because we're all learning together, including Ed and I. Every time we read these stories and critique these stories, we can't help but reflect on our own writing. We're all learning and growing all the time. Okay,
Amanda, you're going to read this one. Over to you.
So this is Dazzling Diamonds, Heroic Horses and Pink Panties by Dez Veares. Alice's nostrils fail to filter the stench of death in the sterilised waiting room. She swallows a little vomit and focuses on a heart-shaped stain amidst the peeling paint of the institutionalised walls. They remind her of the hospice, those walls. The week's mother didn't bother with moisturiser. Mother made Lance promise her that he would always keep her safe. The three of them hugged tightly after the rattle, until Lance lifted the cold and stiffening limbs from Alice's damp neck with a farty squelch. Her soggy blue eyes met his blank stare for the first time, and he had whispered, "I will always love you, Alice." A blob of silver spittle had fallen from his mouth, moistening her pale chin, mixed with just a tiny touch of warm snot from his bulbous nose. Then Nathan came along. Alice knew love. Alice knows it's murder. Lance says Nathan is just a distraction, an infatuation. Nathan is a parasite, he insists, tickling her knee. No one will miss him. But Alice is not as stupid as Lance tells her. She must choose Nathan or Lance, though. She can't have both. Not if she wants to be happy. Alice craves happiness like she craves her dead mother. The green door squeaks. There's a woman in a white uniform with bleached white teeth. She scans the small room as if she is seeking someone in a crowd. But Alice is the only criminal there. It is time to confess. "Alice Nettleton, are you okay, sweetie?" "No, yes, I am." The toothy woman knows she's a killer. That's why she's here. She's too close. Alice can smell toothpaste and tobacco, like Lance. A metallic clanging behind the green door distracts them both. Are they bringing chains for her? "Can you confirm your date of birth for me, please, sweetie?" "I confess. It's because I love Lance, and Lance is a secret billionaire, and I must kill Nathan so that we can get married. Lance loves me. He buys me things. Pretty silk lingerie. I like pink, but Lance says red is my colour. Sometimes he wears the pink. It makes me giggle. Lance says it gives him the fizz. Lance doesn't hit me when he has the fizz. Lance is going to buy me a big, huge stable with diamond-encrusted doors and two gorgeous horses called Loving Lance and Princess Alice. And oh, the bees will buzz beautifully and their manes will cascade like liquid amber, each strand glistening like golden lakes of ecstasy. And Alice, please, your date of birth, sweetie." 15. "The 15th of..." she asked with a tone of emphasised patience. "I'm 15 3/4, but Lance says I look much younger." Alice can't feel them, but the white woman sees the trail of wetness on Alice's face. "And I've changed my mind. I don't want to murder Nathan. I want to keep my baby." "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now."
So thank you, Dez Veares, for the story.
You know, I'm obsessed with Poe and Poe's single effect theory. And what I think Des did really well here was establish that real sick to your stomach feeling, like all the way through from the very beginning when Alice is already feeling like she wants to vomit from the stench of death, through to the snot and the spit and the description of her mother's death and that final rattle, which is the death rattle, the sound people make when they're dying. You know, and all the way through. And I think that's a great vibe to evoke when you're talking about this despicable human and the way he has abused this poor, innocent young girl. I think that was really effectively done. So that's a big tick for me.
Yeah, I agree. It was very visceral. Yeah.
So one thing I just want to call out quickly is the title. Now, to me, the title, which is Dazzling Diamonds, Heroic Horses and Pink Panties. Now, I'm just going to very quickly explain for those, I don't know if it's an Aussie thing, but the word panties is considered especially cringe in Australia. And I know it's a pretty normal word in the US. So I'm not sure where you're from, Des, but I would just say on behalf of women in Australia that panties is a real cringe word. And so, again, I mean, that works if you're leaning into this sick to your stomach kind of feeling. But regardless, I do think that this title didn't really fit with the story. Clearly, you know, Dazzling Diamonds and Heroic Horses, that's what's on Alice's mind. The Pink Panties, not so much. So it's like, whose perspective is this and what does that title really mean in the context of the story? And I don't think it really had a meaning. And even despite the very specific things mentioned, I don't think it's particularly memorable. So I do think that was probably a better choice for title. But, you know, it's not make or break by any means, but just something to think about because it is an opportunity to add more value to your story.
I think it's an interesting title in that when you first read it, it makes you wonder what the hell this story is going to be about because those things are incongruent, like they're not related to each other in any discernible way. But it does, you're right, it does set up a bit of a false expectation because the story doesn't really go there.
No,
right?
Those things are just very tangentially mentioned, really.
All right, so we open in the waiting room and we don't know what kind of waiting room this is. Maybe just at the outset I'll call that out because it's something that I've referred to several times in these critiques that is a bit of a pet peeve of mine is when the story doesn't take the reader along for the ride. So we're in a waiting room, but we don't have enough details. We're just not given the complete picture. And what you're doing here is setting up this reveal at the end of where she is. But the problem is you're also at the same time trying to fill it with all this emotional energy. And without getting that complete picture of the character, we can't feel it. We can't feel it as Alice feels it because we don't know where she is. We don't know why she's there. We're just getting snippets of flashbacks and we need that full picture. And I strongly believe that as a writer, especially in flash fiction, what you should be doing is giving the reader everything they need to connect with the character. Tell us why she's there. Then build her character up. Tell us why she's feeling what she's feeling so that we can also feel that as well. That's one of the things that stood out for me. So Alice's nostrils fail to filter the stench of death in the sterilised waiting room. She swallows a little vomit and focuses on a heart-shaped stain amidst the peeling paint of the institutionalised walls. And maybe a minor nitpick, but the phrase institutionalised walls, I didn't quite feel was correct. Because they're the walls of an institution. But when we talk about things that are institutionalized, we're generally talking about people that are institutionalized and they're kept in institutional systems. But walls are just walls.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that it is an institution. I'm not sure where we are even by the end. Are we at an abortion clinic? Are we at a hospital? Are we in an institution of some kind? That's really not even evident by the end of the story. So I tend to agree about not, I guess, leaving us asking these questions. I'm not sure that the reveal of Nathan being a baby that she's thinking of aborting, that is a twist or a reveal that's rewarding for a reader. And I don't think it's necessary. I think the story itself is compelling enough. I don't think we need the twist to make it more interesting. I think if you want to make it more interesting, you give us more about these characters and about what they're feeling and experiencing. So this isn't just for Des. I think for anyone listening, a lot of people do that, right? It's really common in flash fiction for people to leave that reveal thinking that in some way it's going to make the story more interesting when in fact it actually just makes it more confusing for a reader. And as you indicated, it blocks us from feeling that emotional experience or connecting with the characters. So something to think about. It's certainly not something you should never do.
Yeah.
It's more just thinking about why you're doing it and whether it's actually adding value or detracting from the reader's experience. What I will say, though, is one detail I liked from that opening was the heart-shaped stain. And it's sort of just brushed aside because it's quite a long sentence. But actually, I feel like these details, these really subtle details, are the ones that you can use to add subtext sometimes. Like, why is it a heart-shaped stain and what does that mean in this story? And I think to me that is more interesting than describing the walls, for example. Perhaps using that heart as a device to indicate where she is might have been a more interesting way to open.
So from there, the next paragraph, we immediately go from the waiting room that she's been placed in. You know, you've gone to the trouble of setting the scene up in the waiting room, describing the waiting room, and then immediately whisked the reader into the past, basically. And so there's a bit of backstory that's being told here, the history with Alice's mother and the trauma of that situation. And it's definitely, I think, appropriate to recall that trauma when she is in such a fraught situation now. As a reader, though, I felt what we were placed in a moment and then we're immediately whisked back into another moment.
Yeah, it's difficult in this case. I mean, I think backstory is always risky for those reasons, right? You're taking us out of the story to somewhere else. I do think this backstory was relevant, so I wouldn't necessarily say don't have it. I think as a general rule of thumb, what you're trying to do is think about how much can I bring the story into this scene in the moment. So it's like you're out at a party and someone's telling you a story and you want to be involved in that story and then they're like, hang on. Anyway, so 6 weeks ago, right? And then this happened. And then they keep telling you the story and then they say, but what you need to know is when I was a child, like here's the context. And it's just that real jumping around that I guess detracts a little from the story that's in the moment. Now, I don't think this backstory necessarily detracted from the story. I think it added to the story. But I think you just need to be careful in how you weave it in. For example, there's quite a bit of detail in that scene about whether her mother bothered with moisturizer and the words that Lance was saying and the hug and all of these things. What I want to see is the action that's happening now. Like if the action back then is so interesting that you're going to describe it, then why aren't we in that moment? So when it's backstory, I feel like just give us the information and then move on with what that information means to us in this moment now, in the story now. Like, you know, we're describing here Lance and the spit and the snot and all of these things. Like they're quite compelling details, but that's back in the past. So potentially bring Lance into the current scene. And I get the way you set it up. He doesn't belong there, right? But he could. This could be a scenario where he's brought her to this abortion clinic or whatever it might be, and having him there in the way he tries to explain himself and watching him be disgusting in this moment would potentially have greater impact than sort of referencing a past time when he's not even really part of this story right now. He sort of was in the past. Let's see him face the consequences in this moment, I guess. One thing I wanted to call out from that backstory section was this thing about the farty squelch. Right? Okay, so the line is, the three of them hugged tightly after the rattle until Lance lifted the cold and stiffening limbs from Alice's damp neck with a farty squelch. Now, that line to me was incredibly jarring. It felt really inappropriate. Maybe it's just because I have young children, but you know, that's toilet humor to me. Like a farting sound is really inappropriately comical, and that's fine, right? Because sometimes that's a great juxtaposition, right? Like a really inappropriately comical sound when someone is dying and in that extreme devastating moment really can bring great levity into that sort of situation. But because it's not addressed directly, it's just stated and then we move on, it just leaves me as a reader feeling really uncomfortable with how to feel about that. And again, we've got this unsettling tone, so that's okay. But I'm not sure that that was an appropriate choice here.
Yeah, it's almost a comedic moment that sticks out in a very serious and emotional situation.
Yeah, which again, like in real life, if that happened, you know, you're in the midst of mourning and then that happens and you probably laugh. But that's not the vibe that we have here. There's no laughing.
So then Nathan came along, Alice knew love, you know, and at this point we get the feeling like we're about to hear Alice's life story or we're in the middle of Alice's life story. So again, it kind of takes us a little bit further out of the moment. And also that hidden piece of information we're introduced to Nathan. We don't know that he's a fetus, basically.
Well, I think too what's important, like we've read this a number of times now, so we know who Lance is. But on first reading, it's not clear at all who Lance is.
Yeah.
And then it's very unclear who Nathan is. And those, Lance, Nathan, those names aren't particularly distinct. So as readers, we're kind of getting a little bit lost. Like, who are these characters? What do they mean to each other? I think it would have probably been helpful to describe Lance as the stepfather or whatever it was that he was right up front. So we know his relationship to Alice. So when the mother asks him to always keep her safe, that she asks her husband, or Alice's stepfather, Lance, so that the reader is very, very clear on who this man is. And then if you want to keep Nathan a little bit secret, well then okay. Like that's, at least by then we have a clear idea of who everyone else is, and then Nathan is the only mystery.
Yeah. At Alice knows it's murder, Lance says Nathan is just a distraction and infatuation. We get a picture of what might potentially look like a love triangle with a murder, and which is intriguing, but you're setting up the expectation of something that isn't delivered.
And I think too, this is just super simple, but in the line, Nathan is a parasite, he insists, tickling her knee. Be careful when you've got two characters of the same gender, when you're just using, in this case, he.
Yeah.
So Nathan is a parasite, he insists. Well, Nathan could be insisting that. It's actually Lance. So Nathan is a parasite, Lance insists, tickling her knee would be more clear, because we're not sure who said that. We're not sure who's tickling her knee.
Yep.
We figure it out eventually, but making sure those sentences are always very clear. It's especially important when we've got two characters of the same gender.
And so the final line of that sentence, again, this may be a little bit nitpicky, but Alice craves happiness like she craves her dead mother, is a little bit on the nose for me. Like, I don't know if you would crave your dead mother, you would miss your dead mother, you would mourn your dead mother.
You would crave your dead mother's affection.
Yeah.
But yeah, to crave your mother is an unusual concept to me. Craving sort of has different connotation, I think, to like desperately missing. It almost has a bit of a sexual tone to it, which is not what's meant here. So that's an issue, I think, when you're bringing the wrong vibe to the sentence. It makes the reader question what you really mean by that.
All right. And so the next sentence, the green door squeaks, there is a woman in white uniform. So we've just been given this backstory and we're back in the waiting room. And as a reader, I felt like, well, where are we again? We were in the hospice. We were talking about something else. Now green door is squeaking. So it takes a moment to readjust. Again, this is probably just something that can be fixed with the way that backstory is introduced rather than putting us in one situation, jumping back and then coming into the future again.
It's all those details that are drawing your attention into that backstory. Whereas if you just very quickly stated what you needed to state, about her mother dying, about Lance promising he'd always look after her, and then you're back in the waiting room, it doesn't feel so like you're still there. You're still in the waiting room.
Yeah.
Whereas once you start getting us to paint a mental image of that scene with the mother in the hospice, now like we're there. You've taken us there. And I don't think you necessarily need to take us there. You just need to give us the information.
And so the nurse sees Alice. Alice is the only criminal in the room. And I do like that view of Alice being the criminal and having that stated plainly in the story and not as an abstract, Alice thinks she's the only criminal, but Alice is the only criminal. There's a little bit of intrigue there. We do wonder what's happening. I do wish there was some more information, but I do like that element of being a criminal, and that is how she's feeling, expressing how she's feeling in the moment.
Yeah, and I think too, if you are aiming for this sort of twist angle, which clearly Dez is aiming for in this case, I do think that works because you've set up, you talk about institutionalized walls. We start to question, is Alice losing her mind? That's what I started to question when I was first reading it. Like, who is she? There's obviously a bit of confusion going on here. Who is Alice? What has she done? She's talked about murder. She's talked about Nathan, who at this point we think is potentially part of some love triangle. Like, what has she done? So that is definitely setting up that mystery really well. Again, it's a question of whether that's the mystery that we need as readers. But if that's what you're going for, then I think that was done well.
Yeah. In the next paragraph, there's a reference to Alice can smell toothpaste and tobacco. And I like that reference to toothpaste and tobacco because it does add an extra sensory element to the story. And it's one that I found understandable. Like, I can imagine a hospital worker sneaking out for a quick cigarette and then trying to mask the smell. What I think should be avoided is that filtering of Alice can smell toothpaste and tobacco, the filtering of that through Alice, rather than just the smell of tobacco being in the air.
Yeah, that's something that is an easy fix. So I think that's a thing that we all do on first draft. We're describing sights and smells and sounds and feelings. But as you say, it's called filtering. When we describe it as the character feels, the character sees, the character smells, we're adding a layer that removes the reader from the action. If you can describe the smell in a really evocative way, we know that she smelled that and now we're smelling it too. So it's a simple edit, I think, to take Alice out of that sentence and to just purely describe the smell.
Okay, so from there we get basically the reveal, and this is Alice confessing to the nurse. A lot of information, and it really is almost like an info dump on the reader here of really what's going on in this story. So we get a lot of details here. Lance is being a secret billionaire.
Yeah, so secret billionaire is like a trope in romance, right? Like, that's what people love. You know, they meet this guy and it turns out he's a billionaire. But it did feel odd here. It felt odd because of the character who was saying it, I think. Why is this 15-year-old saying that? That seems like an older woman's reference point rather than a young girl's reference point.
Yeah, and we get that picture start to come together. He buys her things, pretty silk lingerie. Lance says it gives him the fizz. It's kind of that babyish talk. Lance is going to buy me a big, huge stable with diamond-encrusted doors, like all these lavish promises and horses, things that a young girl might desire. And then this piece of purple prose. Oh, and the bees will buzz beautifully and their manes will cascade like liquid amber, each strand glistening like golden lakes of ecstasy. And for me, I felt that was the purple prose Andy prompt there.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit too much for the moment.
Not even so much too much for the moment. To me, it didn't ring true as authentic for this character's voice. So by the end of this story, I'm gathering we learn that she's 15 years old. That is not how a 15-year-old speaks or thinks.
Yeah.
So we gather that this girl has some sort of cognitive impairment, and so therefore she is even more at risk and even more vulnerable in this position. And so we feel a deep sense of empathy for her. I will say that's never explicitly stated or made clear. So that's something we just are left to infer from the way that she's speaking, which is a strange way for a 15-year-old to speak and act and think. First of all, I feel like that whole paragraph could be a lot shorter.
Yeah.
Like the woman who comes in is not letting her just babble like this. Much shorter, but also thinking carefully about how Alice would say this. And I'm not sure it would come out quite this way. And I think it does need to feel authentic for it to be believable.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. She knows all about pretty silk lingerie and she's excited about that, but she's also thinking about ponies.
Yeah.
It's sort of to me like, well, which is it? You know, where is she at developmentally? And I'm not sure that those two things fit together.
Yeah. Okay. And then we go to the ending where we do finally get that reveal of, and I've changed my mind. I don't want to murder Nathan. I want to keep my baby. And we finally learn that Nathan is the baby. But the problem I have there is that it's the second last line of the story. And we finally learn everything we need to know about the story. We learn all about her motivation. We learn about her decision that she needs to make. But we don't have time to process any of it because we're at the end. And that's a really hard decision to make. And we could have been with her that time making that decision, but we just find out about it and it's over. So there's not enough time to get emotionally invested in that decision.
I think the challenge is here too that there's actually a few reveals happening.
Yeah.
So one is that Lance has been abusing her. One is that Nathan is a baby, and, you know, and she's thinking of having an abortion. Another is that she's only 15 years old. Another is perhaps that she has a cognitive impairment. So there are a lot of things being revealed at the end of the story here. And I think one is enough. And I think in this case, in this story, her age is probably enough of a reveal at the end of this story. Or the fact that it is like one of those, the fact that it's Lance's baby, or that it's a baby that she's thinking of aborting. But I think all of that together is too many things to reveal at the end of a story, because what is the story without those things? It's just a sequence of events that we're not really following. It's an issue, we've talked about it in a couple of the other Daredevils this round, of withholding information in a way that prevents the reader from engaging deeply with your story. And I think as authors, we sometimes think that the twist is going to have this payoff and feel satisfying. And in fact, we end up making it less satisfying as a result. And to me, that's what I come to a story for. Not a clever trick, but a resonant emotional experience that makes me feel something. Now, this story does make me feel disgusted. And I think that's a really powerful emotion to have as a result of reading a story. And I sort of suggested it before. I would love to have seen maybe Lance in this story, in this moment, to sort of get his comeuppance a little bit, or to have the reveal with him there in the room, to watch him being disgusting in the room so that we can hate him even more. You know, but without him there, where's his justice? We don't get any of that payoff. We just get Alice is safe now. Well, where is Lance?
Yeah.
You know, what's happened to him? Is he in jail? Is he, you know, presumably not. He's just not mentioned again. And I think that is where the satisfaction lies, not in that was clever and we get the trick, but I feel satisfied that Lance got what was coming to him and Alice is safe now, and this, you know, disgusting, despicable man is going to get what's coming to him. I think, to me, that is what makes a story compelling.
Yeah, we do get that last line, "It's okay, sweetie, you're safe now," which implies that something is going to come from all this. Like, the truth is now out, and presumably someone's going to find out about Lance and something's going to happen. So there is that implied ending. I just wish that that emotional impact had been with us the whole time in the story so we could really feel it when that hits.
So one way of approaching this, just a suggestion, because we're saying, oh, don't have the twist. Well, how are we going to handle that? Well, my suggestion would be to think about leaning into Alice's misunderstanding, right? To Alice, if she has this cognitive impairment, how her worldview differs from us as readers. So if you show us what is happening through the actions and through descriptions of what's going on, for us to see that, and then to see Alice's different perception of that, I think would be really interesting. Yeah. And that would be a way for us to engage with the story and follow along, while also Alice not really. Yeah. Like, she gets the reveal potentially in the end. And also leaning into the betrayal of her, basically, and the abuse of her as being the compelling part of the story, and how she's been mistreated by Lance when he promised to look after her. Like, all of those are compelling things already on their own. So just with the prompts, we've got the word prompt of table. So that appeared in the word stable. I'm talking about horse stables in this particular instance. So that's good. Ticks the box. In terms of stealing, it's not overtly stated, but I would say potentially her innocence. Yeah. Or potentially that she's considering taking the life of a child, or I'm not really sure. It's not overtly stated.
This wasn't really explicit, I think. But I think there's enough there that you can at least make the claim.
You can make the claim. I think it's not obvious. I think I would have liked to have seen it be a little bit more clear what was meant here, but, you know, you can make an argument for it. And then finally, the anti-prompt of break the writing rule, avoid purple prose. It's that character voice. And in this case, it's a young person who is just getting really enraptured by these very dramatic descriptions of, like, horses and diamond-encrusted doors and all these sorts of things. So I thought that was an interesting take and an appropriate one.
So thank you, Des, for sharing your story with us. It's a very emotional story. There's a lot of emotionally resonant elements to that. There's the abortion, there is the mother's death, there's themes of abuse, a lot of themes that are quite heavy and emotionally charged.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I mean, I think that Poe's single effect thing that I like to harp on about was really strongly executed here, that real sick to your stomach kind of feeling, which was very much at the heart of this story. I agree. The themes were really quite intense, which I love to see in flash fiction, you know, really going hard, like looking at some of those deeper issues can be quite powerful. Overall, I think a solid effort at, you know, drama and intrigue and getting us thinking. I definitely got an emotional experience out of this story, which I think is really, really powerful and often lacking. So well done in that regard.
And just looking at our scores for both of us, this wasn't on the long list. We both rated it as a maybe. So neither of us ruled this out by any means. And again, it's just those little details that can elevate your story and make it a real contender.
I just want to say a big thank you, not only to Des, but to all of our daredevils this round, because it's really a public service, I think. Putting yourself out there, letting us critique these stories in public for others to hear is deeply generous on your part, because it allows everyone else to reflect on their own storytelling and think about the ways in which they can tweak things too. And I hope you got something out of it. I know it can be deeply unpleasant to hear these criticisms of your story, but ultimately we want success for you guys. We want you to jump on the long list. Like, that would be a fantastic outcome. So we hope that you feel empowered. If nothing else, we hope you feel deep, deep spite that you want to prove us wrong, right? Like, that's always a really powerful motivator. Whatever you do, please continue writing because you're all wonderful writers and we can sit here and nitpick, but at the end of the day, you did all write fabulous stories and we feel so honoured that you share your talents with us.
And there will be an opportunity to prove yourself very soon. We hope you'll join us on the October round of the Not Quite Right Prize, which is just around the corner. But until then, write on.
Right on.
We hope you enjoyed this special Daredevil episode of Not Quite Right. If you have thoughts on this story, follow us on social media and join the conversation. And if you'd like to participate in the next round of the competition, head over to our website at notquiteright.com. That's WRITE.
Something doesn't seem quite